What is your favorite young adult horror novel? I talk about a few in this video, but I am by no means an expert, as you'll see and as I'll admit, so I want you to tell me yours down in the comments. Hello, I'm Adam Cesare. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take a look at horror fiction and horror cinema and usually talk about the places where they either intersect or we can make some kind of recommendation. If you like this book, you'll like this movie, and vice versa. And if you want to see more videos like this, more recommendations, more movie reviews, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell icon so you don't miss out. So right up front, a disclaimer: if you're one of those people that leaves comments on list videos and are like, it's 2 minutes in and you haven't talked about a book yet, waste of my time, I'm just going to put a timestamp down in the description and you can go fast forward right to where I start listing books if you're that pressed for time while you're sitting down leisurely watching YouTube. So before I started dipping my toes into the channel and talking about what I was reading and what I was watching on YouTube, my reading habits were very much kind of just for me. And occasionally, because I am a writer, horror writer, sometimes comic book writer, I was reading, to read inside and outside of my genre. Not really market research, but just to kind of expand my horizons, and you got to be a voracious reader if you want to be a pretty good writer. But when I got to watching videos similar to mine, watching videos that were talking about books, and especially talking about spooky books, I noticed that a lot of booktubers or horror tubers out there were talking about YA literature. Up to that point, I had nothing against young adult literature. I just hadn't read a lot of it. Getting into the scene, it was all scary stories to tell in the dark and Goosebumps and that kind of thing. Very quickly, I graduated to King and Matheson and Barker and kind of never looked back. So I never really had a full teen YA horror experience. And as a discerning, thinking, omnivoracious reader adult, I kind of gave myself this challenge over the last, year plus, 2 years, that, okay, you should really read more. Surprise, surprise, I really love a good amount of what I read. I really love a good amount of what I've seen people talking about and some stuff I haven't seen people talking about. So I wanted to make this little video that walks through 5 of the best things I've read while I've been on this kind of YA horror discovery journey. As always, everything I talk about, every book I talk about, I put links down in the description, so where you can buy those ebooks and paperbacks. Let's talk about top 5 YA novels that Adam has read at some point during the last few years. So the very first book I'm going to talk about is a little bit of a cheat in a lot of ways, because it's not technically out as I'm recording this video, but it's one of the most recent things I've read, and I thought it was fantastic, and it's kind of not even a horror book. It is Scream All Night by Derek Milman. I was sent an advanced reader's copy of this. I get a lot of ARCs, I get a lot of things like, oh, can you check this out? And a lot of them I just kind of politely decline, not because I'm not all the way interested in them, just because when I take a book or when I take an ARC, I feel like the need to say something about it, even if I don't like the book, or even if I don't really get around to the book. So I try not to do it very often. But Milman was nice enough to reach out to me specifically and kind of give the elevator pitch to this book. And when you hear the elevator pitch, if you're anything like me, you're gonna be like, you know what? I want to check that book out. So that's what I did. Scream All Night is not horror, but it is very horror-centric. It is a coming-of-age comedy about a horror movie studio. It's kind of drenched in horror mythology and horror world building, but it is not a horror novel per se. There's nothing really scary about it unless you find adolescence and daddy issues scary, which, we all kind of do. The protagonist, Dario, and I know the horror fans in the audience are going to kind of already be rolling their eyes like, oh, you named the protagonist after Dario Argento. Yes and no. There is a good amount of kind of horror references, horror winks in here, but they're never really distracting. And the best part about Scream All Night, I think, is the fact that Milman builds his own kind of let's say, alternate universe of horror cinema, because our protagonist Dario is the son of a famous horror movie director who lives and works in this kind of walled-off Gothic castle type horror movie studio. Very secretive, and everyone from like the writers to the camera people to the lighting people to the special effects people, they all live on campus, and it's this secretive kind of Willy Wonka-esque horror movie studio. And Milman does a great job of kind of making this studio feel lived in. Their movies feel like they could possibly be these real B movies, these AIP, Corman, William Castle-esque movie studio that somehow still functions even into the era of DVDs and VOD. And it's a book about a character kind of gripping with his strained relationship with his dying or dead father, coming kind of back, the prodigal son kind of coming back to the movie studio where he grew up, but feels really estranged from, but now has to try to help because it's going out of business. The Willy Wonka comparisons are apt, but there's a lot more depth here. It's beautifully written. It's very funny. I was not expecting to really kind of fall over in love with Scream All Night like I did. So it's not quite out yet, but if you're watching this video of sometime after it was released, it's out now. You should go get it. While I was doing my kind of deep dive into YA horror fiction, I focused mostly on what was hot now, what was out now, what were like kind of the big titles that I should be checking out. And like I said, I liked some of them, and I wasn't a huge fan of some of the other ones. I'm only going to be talking about stuff I like because really, who has time to talk about stuff they didn't love? But I also wanted to check out some horror staples, some YA horror staples that I might have missed from like the 80s and 90s. So I read some Lois Duncan. I read a little bit of R.L. Stine, even though I didn't do the Goosebumps thing because I grew up on those and I feel like I knew well enough what they were. And those are a little more middle grade anyway. But I read a couple of the Skipped Around in Fear Street. And those books are great and they kind of instill a sense of nostalgia in me. But as far as books that came out in the 80s or 90s and held up today, the one that really stood out was Carolyn B. Cooney's Freeze Tag, and this is kind of the newer cover for the new ebook edition that they have. But it was originally part of the Point horror line, which is a horror line in the 90s that has a really cool cover, really kind of goofy Scooby-Doo-esque covers, but I think this cover is actually much more appropriate to the book itself. I kind of got this, I don't even know, the publisher put it on sale. I might have got it there for like 99 cents or free at some point, and I could have lazily was like skipping around on my Kindle and came to this one, and right within the first few pages, it really sucked me in, and I was like, wow, this is kind of maybe far better than I was, dismissively thinking these little paperback YA books from the 90s had any kind of right to be. But Carolyn Cooney, doing some research, clearly a well-respected writer of the era and of the genre. Freeze Tag might be a little bit too nice, especially compared to some of the other books we're going to talk about a little later, which are kind of bloodier and meaner and more adult. But I found the poeticness to Freeze Tag, which is about a young woman who has the kind of superpower to touch people and freeze them. And they can't eat, they can't sleep, they're just frozen directly in time, they're kind of in like a standing coma. And she uses this power to basically threaten the girl across the street who kind of seems to have everything, who has a happy life. She's had a terrible life, and she feels the need to like lash out, so she uses this freeze tagging power. I'm not doing a good job describing it because I'm making it sound silly, and it's really not. It's really kind of a somber, somewhat coming-of-age Bildungsroman. Like, this is clearly some kind of metaphor for both abuse and adolescence and not feeling comfortable with who you are and feeling the need to lash out, but done in a speculative way. It feels like a really good Twilight Zone episode type premise. Next up, we're going to talk about the real gory good stuff, the real modern stuff, the stuff you all want. It's The Merciless by Danielle Vega. Now, the Merciless, out of the things that I'm talking about in this video, out of the 5 books I'm talking about in this video, the Merciless is the only one I've actually talked about on the channel before. Like almost a year ago, I talked about it on my best horror for summer reading, but it matches this theme perfectly, and I wanted to talk about it again, and it's my channel, so you know what, I'm going to do whatever I want. The Merciless really took me by surprise because it is, the easiest way to describe it is Mean Girls meets Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door, and then things go even crazier in the back third of the book. But a group of bully mean girls kidnaps one of their pseudo-friends, acquaintances, and decides that she's possessed and they're going to perform an exorcism, which is really just an excuse for them to torture this girl. It's kind of a brutal book, but it really stuck with me, the idea that it felt very modern and it felt very much like kids could do this, especially in the first half. And then it goes a whole different direction, like I said, in the back half. But it's the book that I read towards the beginning of this kind of great YA experiment. It's the one that opened my eyes to, oh wow, modern YA horror fiction is not exactly, you know, R.L. Stine's Monster Blood. It can be hard-hitting and brutal if it wants to be, but it can also kind of speak directly to how teenagers are and feel today. But yeah, I won't waste too much time on it because we already talked about it before, but The Merciless by Danielle Vega, well worth checking out. There are sequels, and I don't know what it is about me. There's going to be another book on this list that has sequels. Even if I really like the first book or even love the first book in a series, sometimes I just want to hold on to that experience and I don't go forward into the sequels. So if you've read the sequels to The Merciless 2, 3, 4, down in the comments tell me whether or not I should be continuing on or whether I should just stop with that kind of great experience of number 1. The next book I'm going to talk about is one that I haven't seen discussed a lot on BookTube, HorrorTube, so hopefully this is the start of it and you guys will run out and you'll grab it and you'll check it out and start telling your friends about it. It's called Parasite Life. It is by Victoria Dalpe. I hope I'm saying that right. But Parasite Life is a hard book to kind of synopsize because if you tell too far into the story, you reveal even what subgenre the story is actually kind of a spoiler and might diminish your enjoyment of the kind of build up to this reveal as to at least what's going on, because it has this beautiful slow creep dread to it, really dreary beginning, middle, and but it is a book that really knocked my socks off. I read this one recently too, so this and Scream All Night were kind of recent reads and recent pickups, but those are freshest in my mind, and they both just happen to kind of blow me away. It is about a young woman who is looking after her mother, who's infirmed, who kind of has these vague symptoms that seem almost dementia or Alzheimer's-like. And it starts out as kind of like a character study of like what her day-to-day life is, taking care of her mother, like feeding her, bathing her, putting her to bed, and then trying to like go to high school at the same time, and how that alienates her and how that, you know, as a coping mechanism, she doesn't really talk to anyone. And then a new girl shows up at school, Sabrina, and she's like nice and cool and doesn't really know the social hierarchy, so she, you know, starts talking to our protagonist. There's this great depiction of kind of loneliness and intense female relationships with Sabrina and with how our protagonist begins to see her and begins to kind of almost be infatuated by her. And there's this whole thing with the mothers and what is actually wrong with the mother, and kind of we delve into the mother's journal, and it's like a dark secret kind of exposed type story. But again, I'm dancing around what it actually is. If you read the back cover copy of this, it's not going to tell you what kind of book it is. But if you read like Goodreads and Amazon reviews, which I really wouldn't recommend you do, I would just recommend you pick up the book fresh without knowing too much about where it goes or what kind of story it is. It's great. It has some really interesting themes about both like motherhood and daughterhood, and like the way that relationship can be like parasitic, to quote the title, and how it's not purely one way or the other, and friendships and relationships and how they're not purely one way or the other, and how you can kind of take from someone in your loneliness and in your frustration. It's really, really, really beautifully written and really great. All right, I saved the only paperback I actually could scrounge up or find for last. This is Asylum by Madeleine Roux, and why I think it's kind of important to have a paperback for this book in particular. This is the other one that I mentioned that has sequels, but I've only read the first one. But why I think the paperback is important is because it's really kind of art directed to the nines, and there's illustrations, and what this book does really well, and better than it does a lot of other elements of it, is that it instills a sense of place, and it instills a kind of creep factor and a feeling of like haunted house uneasiness. Not exactly that it's an exact haunted house story. It's almost like a kid's adventure, kids on a mystery, a little bit amped up, a little bit more violent, kind of kids uncover a place's dark past mystery type story. What this book does really well, and what I found myself as a, while I was reading it, nearly 30-year-old man, reading this novel, it really did give me the sensation of when I was a kid reading those like scary stories to tell in the dark, those kinds of stories where just like a kind of creaky, moldering insane asylum could conjure up like those images of dread in your mind. And you get the kind of cool art direction in here, which some people will consider, a little bit of a cheat. You need pictures to kind of get your point across, but it's done really well. And like the protagonists kind of find like clues and are starting to unravel like the history of this place, and you see, like the clues that they find. It's a whole lot of fun, especially if you have a kind of younger teen, a kid in your life that you want to be the cool aunt, uncle, the cool mom and dad's friend who like gives them the good stuff or starts them on the path to horror. I think this is the kind of perfect book for that. That's Asylum by Madeleine Roux. There you have it. That's 5 YA novels that horror fans or young horror fans or old horror fans or, middle-of-the-road horror fans are going to like and enjoy some aspect of. I'm Adam Cesare. If you liked this video, please hit like. If you really like this video, go check out my other videos. Subscribe to my channel. If you really like me or want to find out more about me or my books, I write novels, short stories, comic books, novellas. That information is down in the description, and if you sign up for my mailing list, I will send you a free sample, a free couple short stories, and a novel sample. And I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you guys helping me out and spreading the word about my books and reviewing them and talking nicely about them. It really, really helps keep the lights on, so I appreciate it, and I appreciate you. And I will see you next week with another video.